All right, here we are in Tabletop Simulator running a game of Mage Knight. I am going in this video to give you an attempt at a very quick rundown of Mage Knight, which has a reputation for being an incredibly complex game. It's well deserved, um, but I think it is a little overwrought as a point. Um, there are a lot of things to keep track of. But if you miss a couple of things, it doesn't really impact the game all that much if you miss a thing here or there. Um, People get dizzy because there's a lot of stuff going on, but the core is actually really simple, and that's what I want to get at right now, just so you have an idea of pretty much how it plays. First off, you are going to be running a character, a Mage Knight. The Mage Knights are not really heroic. They can be pretty villainous. They're sort of anti-heroes, as it were. The basic idea is they are slaves to a larger power that has made them incredibly powerful, and they are sent on missions that they pursue pretty relentlessly, and they don't care who gets in their way. Scenarios vary. You might have a conquest scenario where you're conquering cities, a liberation scenario where you're rescuing mines from monsters. You might have straight up competition against another Mage Knight, last man standing wins sort of scenario. There's a bunch of different ways that these can go, but each scenario is going to have a set of conditions, duration, a set of victory conditions, and um, special rules that are going to define how that scenario is going to play out. You can play competitively, co op, or solo. The game, if anything, is probably best solo. It's one of the better solo games available anywhere, um, but it does play well as well multiplayer as long as you have a patient group. It will take a long time. Gameplay plays out in a series of rounds. A round is a day or a night, and in most scenarios, those alternate day, night, day, night. You're usually going to play uh, 4 rounds, so that's 2 days and 2 nights, or 6 rounds, 3 days and 3 nights. Again, this varies. On each turn, you're going to be doing each round, you have a number of turns, and again, the turns are going to alternate between the various players. You can see here you have a move order, and essentially you're going to cycle through that order, taking turns of all the different players involved. And even when you play solo, this is going to be remaining in place because the way you play solo is you have a dummy player. That's more of a timer than anything, but you're still alternating back and forth. On a given turn, you're going to play cards out of your hand to move, loot, conquer, level up, build your power. This game is a deck building game. It is all about building a powerful deck and using it as efficiently as possible to accomplish the goal and get the most points. Your deck is going to grow as the game goes on. There are mechanics to allow it to shrink, but for the most part, it's going to grow. As a result, you're going to have more cards to go through, but also as your power grows, you're going to go through them more quickly on the average turn. So each turn, even as the game goes on, or each round, even as the game goes on, usually results in about the same number of turns on average. The turns, however, can wax a little bit longer because you're playing more cards and more stuff is going on. As you're going about your game, you're also going to be able to, in addition to gaining cards to your deck, which is how you accomplish everything, playing cards out of your deck. That's the core of the game. You're also going to gain some ancillary things. You're going to be gaining what are called abilities, and you're also going to be recruiting units of soldiers and monsters and the like that are going to ally themselves with you. But these also play pretty much like cards out of your hand. They simply don't occupy a space in your hand, um, giving you access to more and more reliable sources of power. Everything you do in the game, whether it's moving, attacking, recruiting, healing up, everything is done via playing cards or abilities. And you're either accumulating or getting rid of these cards, playing them, discarding them, junking them, etc. Even taking damage in this game in combat, you don't have hit points, you don't die, you just take cards that clutter up your hand, slow you down to the point where you're pretty much crippled and probably going to lose. The cards that you play have a wide variety of effects. They're often numerical in value. For instance, you might have a card that gives you attack 2 or attack 3 or fire attack 4. And then those numbers are going to compare to the competings. So someone, in order to block an attack 2, needs to play a block of 2 or more in order to defend against that attack. Movement has points, and the terrain has point values required for you to move into the hex in question. There is a time factor here. You have essentially each round, each day or night cycle is going to, as you alternate back and forth between players, involve you steadily working through your deck. When the deck runs out, round over, basically whoever runs out of cards declares end of round, everybody else gets one more turn, and then the round is over. So as your deck grows, you have to worry about playing everything quickly to get everything out of it. Otherwise, if you have a bunch of cards left over at the end, you're out of luck because they're no good to you anymore. You don't have time to play them. So time is a factor, but also accomplishing things is a factor. So you really have to maximize what you can do on every turn. And often it becomes a balancing act between doing what you would like to do and doing what is best for you given the cards that you've been dealt. Movement is on a hex grid. And as I said, each hex that you move into has a terrain cost. You're also going to have a number of features. Here, I'm going to zoom in onto the map here. And you can see my player token for Tovak is the mage that I'm using in this example. You have a number of different terrains. You've got plains, forests, hills, lakes, deserts, and then you have terrain features. You can see here there's a mine on top of a desert. There's a keep in a plain. There's a marauding enemy on this hill, and so on and so forth. You're going to move around this deck, and you're going to interact with the features in the terrain, the enemy units that occupy it, and so forth. As you reveal tiles, the map is going to grow. So I might have moved to the edge of the visible map, and I am going to draw from a randomized set of tiles that are determined by the scenario. And just so you know, there's maybe 11 of the basic countryside tiles in the basic game, 14 if you go up to the Lost Legion expansion. You might, in a given scenario, for example, have a random assortment of 7 of those. 7 out of 14, where order matters because you're placing them one at a time. Even just that, if you were placing them always in the same order, um, on the board, but placing different tiles in different arrangements, you would have something on the order of 17 million permutations of the way those tiles might fall. And that's not considering all the randomness of what enemies show up on a given space, which is also randomized. And then, of course, how you're going to be interacting with it, what Mage Knight you've chosen, what special abilities you gain going forward, what your opponent is doing. Basically, no two games are ever going to play at all alike. That said, there are certain commonalities. Every time you reveal a hex, it's going to basically look something like this. I might go to the edge, spend some movement to reveal a hex, and voila, there's new terrain there that I can continue to move on to. When I reveal that hex, I'm going to see, oh, well, there was a mine here. I can move on to that and get some resources. There's a village. I can go there, speak to the locals. There's a magical glade full of all kinds of energy goodness. And of course, there's a marauding enemy here, which would compel me to go to the pile of randomized enemy cards, flip that token over and place it on the spot. All of a sudden, voila, I've got an enemy I need to fight. I'm going to basically move next to that guy and engage him if that's what I choose to do. If not, I got to steer clear because if I move alongside of him, he's going to engage me. As you go through the game, interacting with the various features and taking out the various enemies, you are going to increase your fame and modify your reputation. The reputation is indicated over here on the right-hand side. That's basically how the people around in the countryside feel about you. If you run around murdering everything in sight, they're going to not like you. If you rescue them from marauding orcs and dragons, they like you a little bit more. And this influences things like recruiting units from the local village, convincing the monastery to heal you, convincing them to train you, and do all the other various goodies that you can do in the various locations. The other majority of this little uh, tile here is fame. Fame is essentially experience and victory points rolled into one. You start with 0 in most scenarios, and as you kill enemies, I'll just flip an enemy here so you can see really quick. This is an enemy that has on the bottom a fame value of 3. So if I was to defeat this enemy, I would gain 3 fame. If I started at 0, I would then drop down to 3. It's also a marauding enemy, so I would increase my reputation by 1. This fame is going to allow me to level up, which is, on this particular case, moving from first level to second level, going to give me an advanced action card and an ability. Those are going to be ways to increase my power. The advanced action cards are basically like the set of basic cards that I start out with, except they're slightly more powerful. The ability is going to play a lot like a card. Sometimes they're pretty minor, but you can trot them out whenever you need them. You don't have to wait for them to show up in your hand, which is very nice. If I was to, suppose when I killed that enemy worth 3, if I was at 6, that would bump me up to 9. I would have gained this level, going up to 3. And what that is going to do is allow me to get a command token. In my play area, you can see I've got my deck of 16 cards. If I was to draw to my starting hand, which is listed on my stats here, I'm going to have 5 cards in my hand at any one time. I start with 16. I've got 5 cards in my hand. If I play them all every single time, it's going to take me 4 turns to go through it. Here's just one example of a hand I might have drawn, and you can see it's going to give me various abilities. We'll go through them at a later date, but movement, I can do things with crystal. I could do move or a ranged attack. This is going to give me an attack or an ice block option. Here's a healing card, and so on and so forth. Units are going to be recruited up here, and they're going to play a lot like these cards. I'll go ahead and grab one, just randomly grab one of these so you can see. If I zoom in on this, you're going to see that they have abilities that are a lot like the cards. This one's a little bit more complicated, but just like a card might give me ranged attack 3, activating a unit gives me ranged attack 1 with a bonus. Once I use it, the command token is placed on top to show that he's used until it gets refreshed. Generally speaking, all your units get refreshed at the end of the round and you advance into the next round. So you usually use a unit once per round. That's one day or night cycle. There are cards that allow you to refresh a unit, in which case you put it back there, indicating that it can go again. As I level up, coming back to what prompted me to come down here, I'm going to take this tile that has my stats, that's my armor and my hand size. I'm going to take that and I'm going to flip it over and turn it into another command token, indicating that I can recruit a unit to this space too. As I keep leveling up every other level, I'm going to get one or more of these command tokens, and my stats are going to creep up as revealed on the lower command token. You can see now my armor started at 2, my hand size started at 5, I'm now at 3 and 6 respectively, and now I can command 3 units. That's how that goes. It's a nice little mechanic. So you want to build your fame, you want to build your influence. At the end of the game, fame not only has given you levels, but it's also going to be the points you count up to see who wins. You want to, in a given scenario, meet the victory conditions to win the scenario, and then you want to see who at the table has the most points and declare them the winner. Your hand size starts at 5. As you can see, it grows, and there are other ways that you can increase it, and you're really going to need to, because in general, other players and the dummy player are going to be going through their decks at about the same pace, maybe even a little bit faster. So as you're going through the game, you might have built your deck up to 30 cards. You're going to have to play a lot if you're going to get through that in 4 or 5 turns. As a result, you're going to need to find ways to increase your hand size. And of course, having a larger hand, if I draw several more cards, I suddenly have a whole lot more things I can do because I have more attack in my hand, more movement in my hand, or whatnot. It gives me more versatility, and I can also start, if I have a bunch of attack, I can start piling those attacks on top of one another, do a lot of damage, and that's what I'm going to need to do if I'm going to take out some of the tougher units. You have several different cards that are going to play in your hand. You're going to have action cards. Your basic action cards are the ones you start with, 16 cards. Each Mage Knight character has slight variations, and therefore they play a little bit differently. For the most part, their starting decks are the same with 1 or 2 cards that are tweaked very slightly. You can see one of those here. This is a Tovak special card. It's essentially a slight augmentation of the determination card that everybody else has. You're also going to see that they all have their own unique sets of abilities, which are going to look something like this. And each one of these, if I mouse over them, has a description on them. And you get a card with the actual game that kind of shows you this. But this is a simple example. These two, I might have this one, which allows me to play it for block. This one allows me to play it for attack or ice attack. And as I level up, I might have collected those. And these are available once a turn. This is something that when I use it, I flip it over until the next round, at which point I refresh it, rather like refreshing all my units. In addition to basic action cards, I also am going to draw advanced action cards as I level up. If you remember going to level 2, I get an advanced action and an ability. So if I come down here, the layout is such that I have 3 units that are recruitable. I've got advanced actions in what's called the advanced action offer. When I gain a level, I just pick whichever one of these I want. And again, there's some randomness which ones are available. But for the most part, they're a lot like the cards in your hand, but better. So as you draw these, you're not only getting more cards into your hand, you're getting a better card power average. Your cards are getting better on average in addition. There are actually ways that you can get rid of the weaker cards in your hand and really have a concentrated deck of power. You're also going to have spells that you can gain, and spells are probably among the more powerful, if not most powerful, cards out there. You're really going to want to build up spells. And then lastly, you've got artifacts, which are not available in an offer because you gain them differently. When you conquer a site or burn down a monastery and pilfer the artifact inside, you draw 2 artifact cards, you flip them over, and you choose which one you want. These actually just happen to be a couple of rings, but you're more or less like all the other cards, you're going to play them for a certain ability. They go into your hand. You'll notice all of these cards have the same back on them. They all have this Mage Knight picture, and that's because when they go into your hand here, they're all in this deck, and you're not going to know which one's coming just by looking at the back. As I mentioned before, when you take wounds, when you take damage in combat, you're going to be taking wounds into your hand. And as you can see, if I have a 5-card limit in my hand, if I take a couple of wounds, let's say I had played a whole bunch of cards. If I take 2 wounds and I still have 3 cards left, I still have 5 cards in my hand. I don't get to draw anything else until I get rid of some of these cards, and hopefully maybe one of them is a wound. At that point, I'm able to draw back up to my 5-card limit. Hooray, hooray. That's the mechanic there for wounds. That's pretty much it, with one exception, and that is the tactics cards. Once every day and night, you're going to have to draw a tactic card, or you're actually going to select a tactic card. And depending on whether you're in day or night, you're going to have different options. You take turns selecting which ones you want, and it's going to be a combination. Essentially, if you pick a more effective tactic that gives you something really nice, it's got a higher number. And then if you pick a lower number card, what you get with it is usually not going to be nearly as good, but the lower number goes earlier in the round order. So if you pick the first card, If you pick card number 1, it actually gives you, as you can see here, gives you nothing whatsoever, but it allows you to go first. So you would take your little marker and you say, I'm going first. And then the dummy player places his marker in the second spot. And really, by definition, you're going to have one more turn than him as a result of that. Finally, last thing to note is that cards, when you play them, you might have picked up on this as I was showing you cards, they've got kind of two effects. Whether it's a basic action card, an advanced action card like you see over here, or a spell card, they all kind of have two effects on them. In fact, even the artifact cards have two effects on them. Generally speaking, if you play the card, you get the top effect. If you want to get the more powerful effect of an action card, you're going to have to charge it with magical energy of a certain color. If you play a spell card, even getting the basic effect requires mana of a certain color, as you can see on these cards. To get the more powerful effect, you have to add that colored mana, you have to charge it even more with black mana, which is hard to come by. Artifact cards are a little bit different in that you get the basic effect if you play it. If you want to get the stronger effect, it's great, but you destroy the artifact, depleting its power in doing so. So you wind up having to throw that card away to get the more powerful effect. Sometimes it's worth it. When you play a unit, as you can see, they've got several different things. You have to pick one of those different options, at which point that unit is expended. Every once in a while, you'll have a unit where one or more of those options, in order to use them, have you activate the unit and also supply it with some mana. So the only question that's left is, where does the mana come from? Mana comes from the mana source primarily, and that is 3 dice, which have the 4 basic colors: red, white, green, and blue. They also have a gold side and a black side. The black side, as I mentioned, is used for powering uh, the more powerful effect of spells. Gold is a wild card. You can use it in place of any basic color of your choice. You get, on one turn, the use of 1 die from the source. So you have to pick. And unless you have some other access to mana, you're going to be very limited in how many cards you're going to be able to power up as a result, because it's random what side these dice are showing. And if I really want to power, say, let's say I wanted to power this card here, I'm out of luck if this is my mana source, because there's no white mana and there's no gold mana in the source. There's a little bit of flavor here in that some of the mechanics are a little bit different during the day or at night. Deserts are easier to move in at night. Forests are harder to move in at night. Gold mana is kind of the daylight mana, if you will. You generally can't use it at night. And black mana is kind of like dark magic, and you generally can't use it during the day. So if you roll black mana during the day, for the most part, this die in the source is actually pretty useless, and sometimes people will call it locked or depleted as a result of it. You can still pull it out and re-roll it in various ways, and if you're down in a dungeon, you actually can. It's treated as night, and you can use black mana. But for the most part, it's kind of out of reach for most of the game during the day. Similarly, if it's night and you roll gold mana, there's not a lot of ways that you can use that die in the source. You can, however, accumulate via cards or special sites, like for instance the mines that you see here on the map. Here I've got a green mine, here I've got a mine that is either red or white. You can use those to get crystals into your inventory, which are essentially frozen mana that you can kind of keep and hang on to until you need them. So generally speaking, as you're going through the game, you're going to be trying to accumulate mana. Maybe play a card like this that allows you to accumulate mana. And then as a result of that, you'll have a stash so that when you have a big important turn, you can power a whole bunch of different cards and smack the crap out of somebody. That's basically it. That's the core of Mage Knight, is moving around the deck and killing things using your deck of cards as optimally as possible, managing your mana resources, exploring, finding enemies, gaining fame to increase your power, and trying to outpace the competition and build up a final score while completing the scenario objective. The basic components are your hand, the mat here, which actually doesn't come with the game, that's part of this program here, but your play area is where you're going to keep track of your units and abilities. So you've got your deck of cards, your stack of abilities, your ever-increasing stats, and a handful of units. You've got the map area, you've got your fame board, the enemies and such that show up on the fame board, the units you can recruit, which then at the end of the round refresh. You've got the advanced actions, which if you take one out, refills itself, and then at the end of the round, the bottom one is refreshed. Same thing with spells. If you learn one, it's replaced, and then the bottom is refreshed. That's pretty much it. It's not that complicated until you get into all the nuances. The nuances of combat, for instance, are many, and we'll save that for the next video. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you got a little bit out of it. That's really the core of Mage Knight. I hope I impressed upon you, if nothing else, that it's really not as complicated as sometimes people make it out to be. You're moving on the map, you're killing stuff. Based on your cards, you're getting mana, you have a tactic to worry about, and then you're drafting stuff into your deck and recruiting units in order to get more powerful. All right, that's all I got. I hope you enjoyed it. Cheers.